Welcome to our channel. Tonight, we are going back. Not so far back that you have to worry about plague or sword fights, or the genuinely harrowing state of 14th century personal hygiene. No, we are going somewhere much more recent than that. Somewhere so close in the rear-view mirror of American history that some of the people who lived are still among us, still willing to tell you, with a particular gleam in their eye, that things used to be different. Things used to be better. That something has since been misplaced or dismantled or quietly allowed to slip away. We are going to 1950s America. Specifically, we are going to spend the night inside the daily life of a middle-aged American man during this decade. Because there is a persistent feeling, it shows up in political speeches, in certain television commercials, in the phrase "the good old days" when deployed with genuine rather than ironic intent, that the 1950s were, in some fundamental way, a golden age. That life was simpler, calmer, that a man could come home from work on a Friday afternoon and feel, for reasons he couldn't quite articulate, that everything was in its right place. Here is the thing that will surprise you. For one very specific kind of person, that memory is not entirely false. Now, before you sit up in bed and start composing objections, let's be careful. Let's be precise. Because the paradise of 1950s America was not posted on a billboard visible from every road and available to all comers, not even remotely. The decade that felt like a golden age for a white middle-class, employed man with a house in the suburbs and a car in a garage felt like something considerably less golden for the women managing those houses, for the black Americans excluded by law and by practice from nearly every economic benefit that generated that prosperity, for the working poor, for anyone who didn't conform to the very specific template that the culture was insisting everyone pour themselves into. We're going to acknowledge all of that as we go, honestly and without flinching. But we are also going to acknowledge this. For the man who fit that template, the 1950s offered a combination of economic security, social certainty, physical comfort, and uncomplicated identity that is difficult to locate in any other era of American history, before or since. The circumstances aligned, briefly and improbably, in a way that produced something genuinely remarkable in the long story of ordinary daily life. So, tonight, we are going to live that life. Hour by hour, room by room, season by season. If this is your first time here, welcome. Hit that like button if you enjoy this kind of slow, immersive history, and subscribe if you want more of it, because we do this every week. Drop a comment before you fall asleep, and tell us where in the world you're watching from tonight. Whether the bedroom in Ohio, a flat above a chip shop in Manchester, a farmhouse in New Zealand. We genuinely love knowing where these words find you. Now, dim the lights, set your phone face down, pull the blanket up just a little higher, because the autumn air is cool and the furnace hasn't quite caught up yet. It is a Tuesday morning in October 1953, and your alarm clock is about to go off. The alarm clock is a chrome dome on your nightstand, a small, determined machine with two bells on top, like little ears and a hammer inside that operates with the enthusiasm of someone who has been waiting all night to do exactly this. It does not fade in gently. It does not sense your sleep cycle and select an optimum moment. It rings with conviction that is almost personal, and it does not stop until you reach for it. You reach for it in the dark. The room is cool, not cold. The furnace in the basement clicked on around 4:30 in the morning and has been working since. And the house has had time to build its warmth again, but there is still that particular chill that lodges itself near windows and at the edges of rooms, the kind of cold that doesn't quite reach the center of the bed, but makes its presence known the moment you move toward the edge of it. Your wife is breathing slowly beside you. Whether she is asleep or simply waiting, peacefully, for you to be up and moving, is not entirely clear. At 6:30 in the morning, the distinction may not matter. You swing your feet out over the side of the bed and onto the hardwood floor. The floor is cool against the soles of your feet, and this is the moment, not the alarm, but this, that fully persuades your body that sleep is finished and the day has begun. You sit on the edge of the mattress for a few seconds, the way people do who are not yet committed to being awake, but are no longer actively resisting it. Let's pause here for just a moment, because something worth noticing is already happening. If you are a middle-aged American man in 1953, the simple act of waking up in this room is Measured against most of recorded human history, an act of extraordinary comfort. You slept in a real bed, a proper mattress, with steel inner spring coils that took the weight of your body and distributed it with something approaching intention. Not a pallet of straw, not a cot in a military barracks. And if you served in the Second World War or Korea, you will remember those cots vividly enough that a good mattress still carries a faint undercurrent of gratitude every single morning. The mattress industry in post-war America is doing very well, which is not something people write ballads about, but perhaps should. Sealy introduced its Posturepedic in 1950. Serta is on store shelves across the country. A decent double mattress in 1953 costs somewhere between $50 and $90. Roughly 2 weeks' wages for a man earning the median income of the time. 2 weeks of labor for 10 years of comfortable sleep every night. Civilization spent several thousand years sleeping on things that were demonstrably not mattresses. And then, in the great material surge of the post-war years, the mattress arrived in nearly every home in America. Progress is uneven and often strange, but it has its moments. You shuffle down the short hallway to the bathroom. The bathroom is yours. A whole bathroom inside your house, with hot and cold running water arriving reliably from a wall. A toilet that flushes every time you ask it to, without requiring you to draw water from a well or make any trip to any outbuilding in any weather. A sink, a bathtub, and if your house was built in the early 50s rather than the late 40s, possibly a separate shower stall. Separate interior bathrooms with running hot water had been standard in American middle-class homes since the 1920s, but the post-war housing construction wave had brought them within reach of families who might previously have navigated more complicated arrangements. You turn on the hot tap. The sound of running hot water filling a sink at 6:30 in the morning is a deeply, almost suspiciously civilized sound. You let it run for 30 seconds while you reach for the shaving brush. Shaving with a double-edged safety razor is a muscle memory operation practiced so many hundreds of times that it occupies the thinking part of you about as much as walking does. The shaving cream comes from a tube applied with a brush in small circular motions, and the whole operation takes perhaps 6 minutes, during which the only sounds in the bathroom are the soft rasp of the razor and the water running in the basin, and distantly, the morning outside beginning to assemble itself. You look in the mirror when you're done. You are, let's say, 41 years old, or 38, or 45. The precise number is less important than what it means here in this decade to be in the middle of your life. Middle age in 1953 is not the charged, complicated territory it will eventually become. There are no magazine articles advising you to reinvent yourself. No wellness culture questioning whether you're living authentically. No podcast about finding your purpose. You are a man in the middle of his life, doing what men in the middle of their lives do. And the culture around you extends its full support to this in every direction. The mirror shows you someone settled. Someone whose place in the world is, at this hour of the morning, entirely clear. You dry your face on a thick cotton towel and head back down the hallway, already guided by the smell that has begun rising from the floor below you. Coffee. Strong, percolated morning coffee. That smell alone is reason enough to be awake. Let's spend a moment with the house itself, because the house is not just where you live. The house is the physical argument that everything in your life has been making since the war ended. You bought it in 1950. Or perhaps it was 1949. The exact year depends on when the mortgage came through and when the development near your suburb finished building the street your house sits on. What's certain is that it happened quickly. The suburb materialized around you with a speed that still seems slightly improbable. What was farmland or vacant land in 1947 became streets with curbs and sidewalks and young trees by 1949, and a fully functioning neighborhood by 1951, with churches and a school and a shopping strip, and the whole apparatus of settled community life already installed and running. Your house is a Cape Cod, maybe, or a small ranch style. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 bathrooms, a kitchen with a dining area, a living room, a den that is gravitating inevitably toward becoming a television room, and a basement that has been meaning for the past 2 years to become a workshop. The house cost you $9,500. You put almost nothing down. This is possible because of the GI Bill, which is a Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, and which is one of those pieces of legislation that occasionally results from a government deciding almost in spite of itself, to do something genuinely right. The bill guaranteed low-cost mortgages for veterans, along with college or vocational tuition and unemployment insurance for those transitioning back to civilian life. By the time the program wound down, nearly 8 million veterans had used it to buy homes, and the demographic and economic transformation of the United States that resulted was so large and so lasting that economists still argue about exactly how to measure it. If you served, and many men your age did, you used a GI Bill. If you didn't serve, you still benefited from the housing expansion it created, because the Federal Housing Administration was simultaneously guaranteeing mortgages, and the entire economy had organized itself around the production of suburban houses with the focused energy of a country that has decided, collectively, that this is what peace looks like. It does look like something. The lawn out front is about 1/4 of an acre, which is enough space to feel alone without being so much space that the ownership becomes a burden. In the mornings, when the dew is still on it and the light is coming in low and flat from the east, the lawn has a greenness that seems almost willful. You mow it on Saturday mornings in rows with a push mower that you keep properly adjusted, because a well-adjusted mower is a small point of pride, and a well-kept lawn is not just a lawn in 1953. It is a character reference. The neighbors notice. They are meant to notice. Inside, the kitchen is the true center of gravity. The living room has the good furniture, the sofa and the coffee table and the matching lamps. But the kitchen has the actual furniture, the table where breakfast happens and where the children do their homework and where serious conversations take place and where most of the meaningful daily life of the house actually unfolds. The kitchen also contains your wife for substantial portions of every day. We will return to this. The house is warm. A forced air furnace in the basement, burning oil or natural gas, heats the air and pushes it through ducts into every room. The thermostat on the hallway wall is set to 68 degrees. You turn it up or down by reaching out and moving a dial, and within about 15 minutes the house responds. You have complete, frictionless control over the temperature of your own home, which is a capability that would have seemed like witchcraft to most humans who ever lived on Earth, and which you exercise without conscious appreciation for fact. There's a garage, either attached or standing behind the backyard. In the garage is a car. We will come back to the car. But first, it is time for breakfast, and the smell from the kitchen has become impossible to ignore. Your wife is already in the kitchen when you come downstairs. This has not been discussed or negotiated. It is simply the geometry of life in 1953, as quietly agreed upon as the shape of the kitchen counter. She has been down here long enough to get the percolator going, to start something cooking on the range, to make the kitchen smell the way a kitchen at 6:45 in the morning is supposed to smell, warm and productive, with that deep coffee smell threaded through everything. The percolator sits on the counter and makes its characteristic sound, a rhythmic, intimate bubbling, cycling the boiling water up through a tube and over the coffee grounds again and again, extracting something richer and slightly more serious than what later drip machines will produce. Percolated coffee has a depth to it, a conviction. If you grew up with it, you will spend decades subtly searching for it in every cafe you enter and never quite locating it. Breakfast in this decade is not an optional event managed on the move. The idea of grabbing something on your way out the door, sipping a branded beverage from a paper cup, while navigating traffic, does not exist as a concept in the cultural vocabulary of a married, home-owning American man in 1953. Breakfast is a meal. It happens at a table. Someone cooked it. Your wife places a plate in front of you. Eggs, scrambled or fried, 2 or 3, depending on the day. Bacon cut thick enough to matter from the butcher or the grocery store, with a fat-to-lean ratio that will concern a future cardiologist, but which in 1953 is simply called breakfast. Toast from sliced white bread, Wonder Bread, or its many store-brand siblings, already sliced and ready for the electric chrome toaster on the counter. Butter, applied without hesitation. A glass of orange juice, either freshly squeezed from actual oranges or reconstituted from frozen concentrate, a technology introduced commercially in the late 1940s that is regarded with mild enthusiasm by everyone who uses it, which by now is most of the country. You drink your first cup of coffee while reading the newspaper. The newspaper arrives on your doorstep every morning, thrown from the bicycle of a 12 or 13-year-old who earns roughly 50 cents per week per customer on his route, and who will In 10 years, remember this job as formative without quite being able to explain why. The paper is your primary window into a world beyond your suburb. The Korean ceasefire, the Eisenhower administration's latest statement, the price of steel, the standings in the American League, and the comics page, which you turn to first. Everybody turns to the comics page first. This is not something anybody admits. The news, when you get to it, is not entirely comfortable. There is always something about the Soviets. There is always a congressional hearing of some variety. There's always a price or a statistic or an international situation that makes the world sound large and unruly and potentially dangerous. But the 1950s newspaper delivers its anxieties from professional distance, with a steadiness that implies the world may be complicated but is not presently collapsing. You read about complexity while sitting in a warm kitchen eating a hot breakfast, and the contrast calibrates everything. Your second cup of coffee goes down while the morning radio plays something suitable for 6:50 in the morning. A news summary winding up its final segment, or a station playing Nat King Cole, or Perry Como, smooth and unhurried, and arranged with a kind of orchestral care that assumes its listeners are not in any particular rush. You are not in any particular rush. You have built your mornings with enough buffer that rushing is not necessary. This is itself a form of luxury. Not the luxury of excess, but the luxury of margin, of time arranged so that the first hour of the day does not begin with panic. You push back from the table, fold a newspaper, carry your plate to the sink. The breakfast sits in your chest like a warm foundation. The morning has already the feeling of something assembled correctly. You are fed. You are in your house. You are about to go to work. Life is proceeding exactly as it was supposed to. You go back upstairs to finish dressing. Your closet is not large by any standard that later decades would find adequate, but what it contains is remarkably clear in its organization. There are things you wear to work, things you wear at home, a small category for church or formal occasions. These categories do not overlap in ways that cause confusion, and navigating them requires no particular thought. This is perhaps underrated as a form of daily peace. Work means a suit, or at minimum a sport coat with properly pressed trousers. The suit in 1953 is not a statement or a costume. It is a uniform, worn because it is what professional men wear with about as much deliberate consideration as you give to putting on shoes. You rotate through 2 or 3 of them across the work week. They are wool. Wool holds shape, breathes in an imperfect but sufficient way, and is simply what men's suits have been made of for so long that the alternatives seem experimental. The color is dark or medium gray, perhaps a navy, possibly a brown herringbone on a Friday, if you feel like it. And if feeling like it is something that crosses your mind, which it may or may not, depending on the week, over a white dress shirt. You own 7 white dress shirts, 1 for each day of the work week. They are cotton, starched and pressed either by your wife or by the Chinese laundry 2 blocks from the center town, depending on the arrangement your household has settled into. The shirt fits neatly at the collar and cuffs. It will continue to fit neatly for approximately 2 hours after you put it on, after which the collar, properly starched, properly snug, will begin its patient project of working a fine red line into the skin just below your jaw on both sides. You will not notice this. You will notice it enormously and all at once when you loosen the collar in the car on the way home this evening, and the relief will be entirely disproportionate to the actual injury. You knot a tie. The tie in 1953 is wider than it will be in the late 60s and narrower than it was in the war years, and it displays a pattern of small geometrics or diagonal stripes in colors that are considered appropriately conservative. You have 4 or 5 of them. Choosing among them is a single daily decision in your wardrobe that comes closest to self-expression, which tells you something specific about the expressive landscape available to a professional American man in the middle of the 20th century. Leather shoes, dark and polished. A white pocket square folded with precision into the breast pocket. A handkerchief, always there, rarely deployed for its stated purpose. Present as a kind of quiet testament to the type of man you are, which is a type of man who carries a handkerchief. In 1953, this means something, though even the people for whom it means something would have difficulty explaining what exactly. You check yourself in the mirror on the closet door. The reflection is settled and armored in the particular way of men in this era. You look like someone going somewhere with a clear purpose. You look like an American man in the middle of the 20th century, which is an aesthetic that radiates a kind of solid, uncomplicated authority that later decades will ultimately imitate and rebel against, often within the same generation. You pick up your hat. A fedora, naturally, not worn with irony, not worn as a style statement requiring justification. Worn because every man you know wears a hat outdoors, because hat makers have spent several decades successfully persuading the entire male population of the Western world that the uncovered male head is an unfinished sentence, and because, honestly, it does look good. It genuinely does look good. You pick up your briefcase, leather, sensible, containing the unfinished report from last night, and whatever your wife has packed for lunch, and you descend the stairs to say goodbye before heading out to the side door to the garage. The garage door swings up on its hinges, and you step into the cool, oil-smelling interior. The automatic electric door opener is a technology that exists by 1953, but has not yet reached your garage, which means the door is still a manual operation, swinging up and back on a pair of counterweight metal springs that require a specific technique, not brute force, but a practiced upward motion followed by a smooth pushback, and the door goes obediently overhead. You have done this so many times that your body knows the motion before your mind engages. You stand for a moment in the half-dark, looking at your car. Your car. Those two words carry a weight in 1953 that is specific to this historical moment, when the ownership of a private automobile is still, for a significant portion of the American population, a relatively recent development. Your father may not have owned one until he was past 30. Some of your neighbors growing up didn't have one at all. You've had yours for a few years now, and the fact of it, the car in your garage still carries somewhere beneath the ordinary comfort of daily use a faint pulse of something that is not quite pride but is related to it. Let's say the 1952 Ford Custom Line in a shade that the Ford Motor Company calls tropical green, or perhaps a Chevrolet Bel Air in two-tone cream and blue, or a Buick Special, if you've been doing well enough to afford to step up the brand ladder. The Baroque extravagance of late 50s automotive design. The rockets, the fins, the chrome applied with the enthusiasm of someone who owns a chrome factory and several friends who also own chrome factories is still a few years away. What you have right now is something with cleaner lines but still unmistakably large, still unmistakably American. You paid perhaps $1,800 for it, or you're making monthly payments on it. The monthly payment in 1953 carries none of the moral anxiety that debt carried for your grandfather's generation. Installment credit is simply how things are bought now. The refrigerator, the washing machine, the car, all of it can be had for a manageable amount spread over a manageable number of months. And the economy has been growing steadily enough that this has not proven to be a dangerous bet. You back down the driveway. The streets of your subdivision at 6:50 in the morning have a quality you could not easily name. The houses have their curtains still drawn, the lawns catching the low eastern light, the air carrying the faint smell of other people's morning coffee drifting from kitchen windows. 2 houses down, the Patterson father is reversing his car in the same motion, at approximately the same time. You raise a hand. He raises a hand. This is sufficient. This is, in fact, the complete social exchange that the 6:50 morning neighbor encounter calls for. The commute is not long. This is one of the structural advantages of the early suburban era. The subdivisions that sprang up between the late 1940s and the early 50s were built in relationship to existing urban employment centers, close enough that the drive could be measured in minutes rather than the geological quantities of time that a later generation of suburbanites will spend on highways designed for traffic volumes they hadn't imagined. Your commute is perhaps 15 minutes, perhaps 22. The interstate highway system, which Eisenhower will sign into being in 1956, is still being debated in Congress, and the roads you travel are 2-lane federal routes with the occasional traffic backup behind a delivery truck. The radio plays. You have tuned it to something appropriate for the morning. A news summary winding down, or a station playing the kind of popular music that the mid-50s runs toward, orchestrated, smoothly produced, comfortable the way a warm room is comfortable. Nat King Cole's voice from the car's single dashboard speaker has a quality of warmth that seems specifically suited to the morning commute in autumn. The gas gauge reads somewhere between a half tank and full. You do not think about this. You do not calculate miles per gallon or monitor fuel costs with anything approaching attention. Gasoline in 1953 costs about 22 or 23 cents per gallon. The emotional relationship between an American man and his automobile's fuel consumption in this decade is characterized by something close to perfect indifference. The gas is cheap. The car is large. Both of these facts are accepted as natural features of the landscape. You pull into the parking lot at work and straighten your hat in the rearview mirror. The day is about to begin in its proper register. The building is 4 stories brick, built probably in the late 30s, with a lobby that has a particular smell of post-war American office buildings. Floor wax, cigarette smoke, the faint chemical undertone of the cleaning products used by the night custodial crew. The elevator is attended. A young woman in a neat uniform who operates the lever announces the floors in a clear voice and says good morning to each person who enters. You say good morning back. You mean it. This is not a performance. In 1953, the ordinary courtesy between strangers in professional settings has a quality of genuine expectation behind it. The expectation that people will acknowledge each other's presence in passing, that a held door will be noted, that the elevator attendant will be spoken to with respect rather than invisible. The social contract between strangers in this era is not perfect, but it is not abandoned. It has a functioning quality. Your office is on the 3rd floor. You work for, let's say, a manufacturing company or an insurance firm or a utility or one of the tens of thousands of businesses that the post-war American economy has generated in such abundance that employment for a man in your position is not a thing you worry about. It is simply a condition of your life, like oxygen. Your title might be department head or senior account manager or assistant to the vice president of something that has operations or sales in its name. You manage paperwork, people, and particular organizational weather of a mid-century American office. The office itself is a room of 20 or 25 desks arranged in rows, with your own space set slightly apart, a private office or a semi-private area behind a low partition, indicating your seniority in a way that everyone understands. Fluorescent lights hum overhead with the patient. Continuous dedication of fixtures that have no concept of another way to exist. The windows are large but sealed in every season in which opening them would be comfortable. Everyone in the office smokes. This is not a figure of speech. In 1953, approximately 45% of all Americans smoke cigarettes, and in an office composed primarily of middle-aged professional men, that figure runs higher. Every desk has an ashtray, generally a glass or ceramic affair with a notch cut into the rim, for holding a lit cigarette during the interminable moments when you're trying to read something and don't have a free hand. By 10 in the morning, the air has taken on texture. By 3 in the afternoon, it has taken on color. None of this registers as remarkable because it is simply what air is like in offices, in restaurants, in train cars, in the living rooms of America. Until it stops being that way, nobody notices that it is. You hang your hat on the coat rack and open your morning mail. Your salary, if you're in management or a senior professional role, might run between $6,000 and $8,500 per year. Let's put you at $6,800. In 1953, this figure is capable of covering your mortgage and your car payment and your family of 4 and a summer vacation and still producing something for the savings account. The mathematics work. Not lavishly. You are not rich, not by any reasonable definition, but they work steadily and in the right direction, which is perhaps the most important quality a set of mathematics can have. The post-war American economy is doing something that is easy to take for granted when you're inside it and genuinely extraordinary when you see it from the outside. It is growing, and it is growing in a way that benefits you. Corporate profits are high, but wages are also rising every year, steadily, reliably, producing a gradual upward drift of living standards that your parents' generation, who came of age during the Depression, experienced as close to miraculous. Union membership in 1954 will reach its historical peak as a percentage of the American workforce. Even in non-union offices like yours, the competitive pressure to retain good employees keeps compensation moving in the right direction. Nobody in your office is worried about being laid off. This is such a basic statement that it barely seems worth making, and yet in the context of what American professional life will eventually become, the quarterly restructurings, the consultants with their organization charts and their right-sizing language, it represents something close to an entirely different relationship between an employer and the people who work for them. Your company has, in the old sense of that word, employees. People they have hired and intend to keep, not as a formal legal obligation, but as a practical social understanding between an institution and the people who constitute it. You will be here next year. You know this with the same calm certainty with which you know that your house will be there when you get home. The mid-morning donut appears in the conference room along with a box of slightly stale glazed rounds from the bakery on 5th Street, and the coffee in the office percolator is, as always, about 60% of what it should be, and someone makes a mild observation about last night's baseball game, and the meeting proceeds through agenda items with the organized efficiency of people who have been doing this together long enough that the meeting itself is almost companionable. Almost. It is still a meeting, which means it still runs slightly longer than it needs to, and the point about the quarterly figures at item number 4 is made twice without anyone noting that it has been made twice, because this is what meetings do. You return to your desk at 11:15. The morning mail has been dealt with. 3 phone calls have been made and 2 received. A report sits in your out tray that didn't sit there when you arrived. By the standard of any productivity metric you care to apply, the morning has been successful. And now it is time for lunch, which in 1953 is not a negotiable detail of the working day. Lunch is an institution, not always a grand one. Not always a kind involving white tablecloths and a waiter who addresses you by name, though that will happen on certain days too. But it is always a real meal at a real table away from the desk between approximately noon and 1:15, and nobody in your office needs to be reminded that it happens or asked to shorten it unreasonably. You walk out of the building with 2 colleagues into the October noon. There is a particular pleasure in exiting an office building into the middle of the day. The air outside is genuinely different from the air inside. Cooler, cleaner, smelling of exhaust and fallen leaves, and a hot grease smell of a lunch counter 2 blocks west. Your hat goes on the moment your foot touches the sidewalk. The collar is still buttoned. You walk with the ease of men who are exactly where they're supposed to be, doing exactly what the time of day calls for, which is walking to lunch. The restaurant you frequent 3 days a week has red vinyl booths and a lunch counter along one wall, with spinning stools and a pass-through window to the kitchen through which you can see the short-order cook operating with a kind of practiced speed that is its own form of artistry. The menu is laminated and doesn't change. The waitress. Her name is Dolores, and she has been working this lunch shift for 4 years, knows that you take your coffee with 1 sugar and no cream, and that you generally order the roast beef open face on Tuesdays. The food in this place is American in the specific sense that the word had in 1953, a set of dishes that assumed you were hungry and planned to stay that way for several hours. The open-faced roast beef with gravy is a serious piece of work. The club sandwich with toothpicks is precise and cold in all the right places. The pie, rotating under a glass dome by the register, is real pie, 4 or 5 varieties, with actual crust made by someone with a specific talent for crust, and it costs about 20 cents a slice. Some Tuesdays, you and a colleague go somewhere slightly nicer. The slightly nicer place has a bar that serves lunch, and at lunch the bar is occupied by men in suits and women in good dresses having drinks with their meals in a way that nobody considers remarkable or worthy of comment. The 3-martini lunch is both a real thing and a slight exaggeration. What is real is this. 2 drinks with a business lunch is completely unremarkable, unreported to employers, and in certain industries essentially expected. The martinis cost perhaps 65 cents each. The steak sandwich is $1.60. This is a regular business expense that will eventually become a cultural shorthand for excess, but right now it is simply lunch. You tip generously because you are a regular, because Dolores or whoever is serving you works hard and on her feet all day, and because the man you have decided to be, the man that 1953 is helping you be, is decent to the people who bring him his food. You are back at your desk by 1:20. The afternoon is slightly slower than the morning, in the way that afternoons in offices generally are. The 3rd cup of coffee appears at 2 o'clock. The cigarette that goes with it is perhaps the 9th of the day. A Bakelite desk phone rings with a genuine bell that does not suggest you might want to get around to answering it. It demands it immediately and without apology And this forthrightness about the urgency of telephone communication produces a particular clarity in your relationship with the phone that will be interesting to contrast against the dozen notification sounds that a future generation will develop from managing the same basic human need to contact one another. By 4:30, the workday is resolving itself into closing choreography. Papers filed or set aside for tomorrow. Jacket retrieved from the chair back. Hat from the coat rack. Briefcase collected from the corner. A brief conversation at the elevator with a colleague from the second floor about nothing in particular, which resolves itself in the lobby and then dissolves on the sidewalk into separate trajectories. Your car is in the parking lot. The drive home begins. Before we follow you home, let's spend a moment with the economic forces that have produced everything we've described so far. Because without this context, the house and the car and the job and the lunch and the Saturday golf course and everything else that we're going to see tonight sounds like luck. And it is partly luck, the luck of birth and race and timing, and the particular economic moment America found itself in after 1945. But it is also something else. Between 1945 and the end of the 1950s, the United States experiences the longest unbroken period of economic growth in its history to that point. Gross domestic product essentially doubles. The median family income, adjusted for inflation, rises by nearly 30% during the decade. Unemployment, which reached 25% during the worst of the Depression, and which anyone who lived through those years carries in their nervous system as a possibility never be dismissed, runs throughout the 1950s between 3 and 5%. Economists studying these figures decades later will describe them with something close to reverence. And crucially, this is the part that is easy to miss. The prosperity is diffuse. It does not pool at the top. It runs through the middle of the income distribution in the broad way of a spring thaw, reaching the factory worker with a union contract, the salesman with his commission, the department head with his salary and his pension and his 2-week summer vacation. It does not reach everyone equally. The racial wealth gap, maintained by explicit policy, is a stain on this picture that bleeds through every description of 50s prosperity. But for the specific demographic we are tracking tonight, the upward drift of wages and living standards in the 1950s is real and sustained and experienced as something close to natural law. The house will be worth more in 5 years. The salary will be slightly higher next year than this year. The pension, when it comes, will actually arrive. These expectations, calm, moderate, reasonable, are the true psychological secret of 1950s middle-class life. Not extravagance. Not a conviction that you deserve more than you have. Just a solid expectation that the floor will hold and the direction is generally upward, and that the work you do during these years will be repaid in the life you get to live. It is worth knowing, as you drive home to the golden afternoon traffic, that this economic landscape was the product of specific deliberate choices. Tax rates that, at the high end, funded massive public investment in roads and research and education. The GI Bill that educated and housed a generation. Unions that pushed wages upward across entire industries. A banking regulatory framework built carefully from the wreckage of the Depression to prevent the casino behavior that would eventually return. These were not accidents. They were choices made at a specific moment in American history by a political culture that had lived through the Depression and had been persuaded, deeply and viscerally, that unchecked markets left to themselves produced outcomes that no democratic society should have to accept. You don't think about any of this. The prosperity simply is. The same way the floor of your house is simply there when you step on it. The traffic slows slightly at the intersection near the grocery store. Through the windshield, you can see the lights of the subdivision coming on one by one as October dust settles into the streets. The subdivision glows warmly in the cooling evening, looking precisely like what it is, a large number of families arriving at the same time of day at the same general conclusion, that today is done, that the house is good, and that whatever comes next, it comes next inside those lit windows. You signal and turn onto your street. You are almost home. You pull into the driveway at 5:42. The routine of what happens next has worn itself smooth through daily repetition into something that functions like ceremony without the self-consciousness of ceremony. Side door, because the side door opens directly into the kitchen. One step up and in, and you are immediately inside the smell of whatever is cooking for dinner. The kitchen radiates warmth. Your wife has been preparing dinner since 4 o'clock, a timing that assumes you arrive between 5:30 and 6, an assumption so reliable that it functions as a scheduling constraint for the entire household. Tonight, it might be a pot roast that's been going low and slow since 2, the kind that produces a smell of braised beef and root vegetables that is stripped of all pretension, one of the genuinely good smells available to human nose. Or it could be pork chops with canned green beans and oven potatoes. Or a casserole. The 1950s is a high watermark of the American casserole. That hospitable, everything from one dish approach to feeding a family, and canned cream of mushroom soup has somehow become a universal binding agent that holds the era together. You hang your hat on the hook by the door. You loosen your tie. This is not a casual gesture. The loosening of the tie is the physical signal that marks the exact moment of transition between the public man and the private one. You are no longer the man at the office. The collar button pops open, and with the whole professional architecture, the day relaxes just slightly, the shoulders coming down a degree, the jaw unclenching in ways you weren't quite aware you've been clenching it. If the children are young enough, they appear. They materialize from wherever they've been since 3:30, the street, a friend's backyard 2 houses down, the kitchen itself if a snack was available, and they had a particular kind of energy that is characteristic of children who have been outside all afternoon and are now inside, which is to say a great deal of energy directed without a clear target. Your youngest might grab your hand. Your middle one has something to report that is apparently urgent. Your oldest is more careful about it now, working out what kind of man-to-man distance is correct at whatever age they've arrived at. You set down your briefcase. You will have one drink before dinner. Not compulsively, not desperately. Just the transitional logic of a highball, whiskey and soda, generally, or a beer the week has accumulated a particular kind of weariness, or a cocktail if it's a Friday and the week has been the kind that ends by silent consensus with a properly made cocktail. The drink is not about alcohol. It is about the 20 minutes of having something to do with your hands while the day finishes converting itself into evening. You sit in your chair. The chair is yours. This is understood by everyone in the household with the clarity of something that requires no explanation. The specific upholstered armchair near the corner of the living room, angled toward the window or the television, is yours. No one sits in it when you're home. The children may use it when you're at work. The exact arrangement of household permissions during working hours is a separate and unmonitored system. But when you're home, the chair is yours, and it is yours with the quiet authority of furniture that has been assigned rather than claimed. You drink your highball. The street outside is darkening. Someone at the far end of the block is still raking leaves in the last of the light. A car goes past slowly. The children have moved their noise upstairs. A moment like this, a drink in your chair in the early evening, the house warm around you, the dinner smell reaching from the kitchen, the outdoor world visible through the window, as it does what the outdoor world does at 5:50 on an October Tuesday, is not a dramatic thing. It is not a thing you would describe to anyone, because it does not translate easily into language. It is simply the feeling of things being right. In a moment your wife will call that dinner is ready, and you will go to the table. But for now, the chair is yours and the drink is cold, and the evening is doing what evenings do, slowly and without any particular request from you. The marriage at the center of your 1950s life is a specific institution, and if you are the man inside it, the institution's terms are, broadly speaking, working in your favor. Let's be honest about this. The 1950s marriage operates on a division of labor that is absolute and spatial and largely unexamined. You go out and earn the money. Your wife converts that money, through daily labor conducted in the house, into a functioning domestic environment in which your life takes place. She cooks 3 meals a day. She maintains the cleanliness of every room. She tracks the children's schedules, their medical appointments, their social arrangements, their clothing sizes, and the exact date when the pediatrician said to come back. She maintains the social relationships with the neighbors, the school, the church, the extended family on both sides. She makes the house run. You provide the economic inputs. She provides the organizational and physical labor that transforms those inputs into daily life. From the outside and from the future, this arrangement looks like what it is: an enormous amount of work performed by one person and essentially invisible to the other. In 1953, the cultural vocabulary for describing domestic labor as labor, real labor, skilled labor, labor that has economic value and social importance, is underdeveloped at best. The word homemaker is meant to elevate the role. What it mostly does is put a sepia-tinted frame around it without changing the frame's contents. But let's be equally honest about what it looks like from inside, from your armchair in the living room. It functions beautifully. The coffee is there when you need it. The shirt is pressed and hanging. The bill from the doctor's office is filed before you would ever think to look for it. The children are fed and bathed and assisted with their homework on a schedule that runs, as far as you can tell, automatically. The systems your wife runs are invisible to you in exactly the way that truly excellent infrastructure is always invisible. You only notice them when they fail, and they almost never fail. You met her in 1945 or 46. You might have known her from before the war. A neighborhood girl, a classmate sister, someone you've been aware of since high school in the way of people who exist in overlapping social worlds without quite intersecting. Or you met her after, at one of the social venues that postwar America generated for exactly this purpose. A church event, a friend's party, the bowling alley on a Saturday night when a group of returnees and the women who'd waited and the women who hadn't waited for anyone in particular but were 23 and ready for whatever came next all arrived in the same room at the same time. You chose her. She chose you. The courtship was not long. 1946 was the single greatest year for marriages in American recorded history. More Americans married in that year than in any year before it, driven by the simultaneous release of years of deferred plans and the overwhelming human need, after everything the war had done to ordinary life, to get back to something ordinary. The desire for the domestic was not propaganda. It was biology and psychology and history converging at the same moment. The marriage, whatever its structural asymmetries, is also genuine. You are companions in the truest sense. Two people who have been in the same house for 7 or 8 years, who have navigated the particular difficulties of those years together. The lean early months before the salary caught up to the ambitions. The medical concern about the second child that turned out to be nothing. The year when the furnace went and the savings went with it. And who have, through this navigation, developed a particular intimacy of people who know each other's rhythms so well that a conversation can happen in 4 words and still carry its full meaning. You argue. All couples argue. The arguments of 1950s married life tend to be about money or children or the management of social obligations. The practical arguments of two people managing a complex joint enterprise. They are not generally arguments about whether the enterprise should continue. Divorce rates in the 1950s are lower than they were in the decades before or will be in the decades following. This is partly because divorce is socially difficult and legally cumbersome and financially ruinous for a woman with no professional income. And it is partly because the people inside these marriages remember what instability feels like, remember the depression, the war, and have a very clear idea of what they are protecting when they choose stability. The evening, when it comes, belongs to both of you. After the children are in bed, after the television has done its portion of the evening's work, there is a quiet hour when the house settles around you and the marriage is simply two people in a warm room, reading or talking or listening to the radio with the comfortable ease of people who have earned a quiet evening and know it. This, too, is part of what the decade offers. The completeness of a life arranged around something legible. The particular satisfaction of a role you can actually fill. 3 children is the American average in 1953, and you probably have somewhere between 2 and 4, depending on the specific arithmetic your family has arrived at. They are loud, vigorous, and measured against how children will be managed in future decades, breathtakingly unsupervised. The baby boom is not yet over in 1953. The great demographic surge of births that began in 1946 has years left to run, and every neighborhood, every school, every public park, every backseat of every large American automobile is crowded with children. The ratio of children to adults in certain suburbs of 1953 approaches levels that would be alarming in the context of a nature documentary, but which in actual lived experience are simply the sonic texture of life in the decade. Your children walk to school. This deserves a moment's consideration. In 1953, children in American suburbs walked to school, alone or in the mixed age groups of neighborhood children that form naturally on routes established by years of accumulated foot traffic. They navigate intersections where crossing guards stand, often older students assigned a role, wearing orange belts and carrying paddles with the understated authority of 12-year-olds who take civic responsibility seriously. They arrive. They learn things. They walk home. Nobody follows them with a tracking device. Nobody has mapped their route on a safety application. Nobody waits at the school entrance with an expression of carefully managed anxiety. The children are simply out in the world, getting from one place to another under their own navigation, in the company of other children, using the spatial intelligence that children develop when they are routinely expected to use it. They come home and drop their school bags on the kitchen floor, and eat something and go back outside until dinner. This is a pattern of an American childhood in the 1950s, in the suburbs where the streets have no significant traffic, and the neighbors are known, and the spatial boundaries of acceptable movement, not this far, home by dark, tell someone where you're going, are understood rather than enforced electronically. Dinner is a family event without exception. The family eats at the dining room table, together, most evenings. Your children report on their days, or resist reporting on their days in the way of children who have calculated, correctly, that the full account will be either incomprehensible or alarming to adults. You ask questions in the form of specific prompts. How was a history test? What happened at recess with the thing from last week? And the children answer with varying degrees of accuracy, and the meal proceeds. Television, in these early years of the medium, is a negotiated presence in family evenings. The set has been in the living room for perhaps 3 years. In the late 1940s, television ownership in American homes was in the low single digits as a percentage. By 1955, it will be somewhere around 65%. By 1960, close to 90. The adoption curve is the steepest for any consumer technology in American history to this point, which says something clear about what people were willing to rearrange their living rooms and their evenings to obtain. You watch it together, mostly. The family assembles in the living room at a specific hour and watches the programs that are on, because there is no alternative to watching what is on. There are 3 networks. Nothing is available on demand. The television program that is on right now is the program you are watching, and there is something in this enforced collective attention. Everyone seeing the same thing at the same moment, that will later be recognized as a form of cultural commonality that disappears when everything becomes individually selectable. Your children eventually go to bed. This takes longer than it should. It always does. And then the house, with the children finally asleep and the television off and the dishes done, settles into a particular silent house at rest in the middle of a decade that, for all its tensions, has somehow arranged itself into something that feels, from inside, on a Tuesday night in October, like exactly enough. The neighborhood around you is a real social unit. This is worth saying directly, because it is something that the later movement of American life toward digital community and individually curated social networks will make genuinely hard to explain. Your neighborhood is a place where you know the people who live near you, not because you have chosen them, not because they share your particular interests or political views or aesthetic preferences, because they are there, because proximity, in a world where social life has not yet migrated behind a screen, is the primary mechanism of human connection. The Hendersons to your left, the Murphys to the right, the Pattersons across the street with the 4 children, and the beagle that regards a fence between your yards as advisory rather than binding. The Kowalskis at the end of the block, who have been there since before any of you, who remember when the street was new, who constitute the institutional memory of the neighborhood the way that old trees do, present before the current generation arrived, and likely to outlast a few of them. You know these people. Your children play with their children, running in and out of backyards with the fluid geography of the very young, who do not register property lines as meaningful social borders. The wives borrow things, a cup of something, a specific tool, advice about the school's new principal, the recipe for whatever was served at the block potluck in August, and this small economy of exchange, which no one accounts for and everyone benefits from, is one of the ways a neighborhood becomes more than a geographical description. On summer evenings, you stand in driveways. The driveway conversation is a specific 1950s institution. 2 or 3 men, sometimes more, standing near cars or at the edge of the lawn in the cooling evening, talking about nothing in particular for 20 or 30 minutes. Baseball, the weather, and whether the weather will cooperate with various Saturday plans. Work. In the general non-specific terms that working men have always used to describe their working lives to each other. The frustrations, the small satisfactions, the management decision that mystified everyone on the floor, the colleague who is difficult in ways that can be communicated through tone and expression rather than full description. Nobody discusses feelings. This is not because the men in the driveways don't have feelings. The inner lives of 1950s American men are, by all available evidence, as complex and inhabited as those of any other group of humans. The feelings are there. The vocabulary and the social permission for expressing them in a driveway conversation with two neighbors are roughly the size of a business card. The conversation proceeds, therefore, at the level of the observable, the car, the baseball team, the weather. But something real is happening anyway. Connection, membership, the quiet, specific knowledge that you are part of a group of people who live in the same place and would, without great hesitation, help each other if help were needed. This is not small. In the long, difficult history of human beings trying to figure out how to live near each other without making too much of a mess of things, the ordinary knowledge of who your neighbors are, their names, their children's names, the car they drive, the fact that their youngest has been sick all week, is one of those things that people, when they have it, sometimes take entirely for granted and, when it is gone, miss with a vagueness and persistence that is hard to trace back to its specific source. Block parties happen in summer. Someone suggests it. Someone else agrees. The street is briefly closed at both ends, and the neighborhood assembles with folding chairs and covered dishes and children who immediately dissolve into a collective group entity with its own internal organization and its own separate set of summer negotiations happening in the alley behind the Kowalski's garage. The men stand together. The women stand together. This is a default social geography of informal gatherings in 1953, not enforced by rule, but reproduced by habit, so consistent it feels like nature. The separate clusters talk about different things in different ways. Eventually, later in the evening, the clusters become more mixed, and someone finds a radio station, and the summer night happens around everyone in a way that feels, without anyone planning it, like exactly what summer evenings are for. You drive home from these evenings, if you drove to them, which units they are in your street, feeling particular quiet satisfaction of someone who belongs to something, which you do. On Saturday morning, you drive your wife to the grocery store, probably the A&P or the Piggly Wiggly or the Grand Union, or whichever regional chain has installed its efficient fluorescent rectangle of commerce in the shopping strip nearest to your subdivision. The supermarket in 1953 is the triumphant conclusion of 3 decades of retail evolution, and walking through one is like receiving an argument about what civilization means, presented in the form of food. The store is large. It is fluorescent lit with that particular quality of fluorescent light that removes shadows and makes everything slightly more real than the outside world, a phenomenon that retailers have understood intuitively since fluorescent tubes became commercially available. In summer, it is one of the most reliably air-conditioned spaces you encounter outside your office, which makes it a destination independent of its stated commercial purpose. The aisles are organized with a logic that someone thought carefully about. Fresh produce near the entrance, where the smell of growing things draws you in before you've quite decided to be engaged. Meat at the back, requiring you to travel past everything else to reach it. Canned goods in the long middle aisles. A range of the confidence of civilization that has decided the tin can is a definitive solution to the problem of food preservation, and has decided it with sufficient conviction to stock 12 varieties of Del Monte peaches in one aisle alone. The canned goods section of a 1953 supermarket is a monument to a very specific moment in the American relationship with food technology. Cans in every direction. Campbell's soup in its red and white costume, the label so consistent and so ubiquitous that in a few years an artist named Warhol will make the observation about them that needed making. Del Monte, Heinz, Bird's Eye frozen vegetables, which are a slightly more recent technology and carry a faint air of scientific sophistication. The Swanson Corporation, as of this very year, 1953, has just introduced a frozen TV dinner, A tray of turkey and potatoes and something purporting to be a vegetable, packaged in a compartmentalized aluminum tray designed to be heated in the oven and eaten while watching television. It is a novelty. It will not remain a novelty. Your wife navigates this with expertise you do not have and do not pretend to have. This is her domain, and she operates in it with the efficiency of someone who has done this shop every week for years and knows exactly which brand of dishwashing soap is worth the extra 3 cents and which is not, and knows what needs to be bought this week and what can wait until next, and knows the approximate cost of the entire basket before the cashier has rung up the first item. You carry things or push the cart if the cart is available. You are occasionally consulted about the Jell-O flavor. You have opinions about the cut of beef for Sunday dinner, which you volunteer, and which are received with a polite attention that represents spousal accommodation of the husband's conviction that he knows more about meat than he probably does. The meat department is well stocked. A sirloin steak runs about 60 cents a pound. Ground beef for a meatloaf, roughly 40. Chicken has been getting cheaper since the poultry industry began its post-war industrialization, and pork is widely available and reasonably priced. The American diet in 1953 is, by every future nutritional standard, aggressively high in fat, salt, and refined carbohydrate, low in vegetables and fiber, and organized around the protein-forward meal in a way that reflects both the memory of wartime rationing and the genuine pleasure of being able to eat what you want again. You are eating extremely well by your own metrics. A future cardiologist, presented with the dietary diary of a middle-class American man in 1953, would experience something between professional concern and a kind of awed disbelief. But the cardiovascular epidemic is a background phenomenon in this decade, real and building, but not yet the center of public health attention, because the epidemiological evidence is still being assembled and the Surgeon General's report connecting cigarettes to cancer is 11 years away. You pay at the register. Cash, almost certainly. Credit cards exist in 1953 in early and limited form. Diners Club introduced theirs in 1950, but the default mode of consumer transactions is still physical currency, handed across the counter to a cashier with an electric adding machine and a practice speed. The week's groceries for a family of 4 or 5 cost somewhere between $12 and $22. You carry the bags to the car. The rest of the Saturday is yours. Saturday in the suburbs of 1953 belongs to you in a way that is genuinely difficult to describe to a culture organized around productive use of every available hour. You are not scheduled. Sit with that for a moment. There is no children's sports league requiring your presence and your volunteer hours and your performance of parental engagement in bleacher seats for 3 hours on a cold Saturday morning. There is no work email arriving on a device in your pocket that makes working hours and non-working hours a distinction that exists only in theory. There is no social media requiring management, no digital community expecting engagement, no streaming backlog demanding attention. There is Saturday, and Saturday is yours to do with as you like. You might go to the golf course. Golf in the 1950s is undergoing one of the most significant democratizations in its history. The post-war suburban expansion brought with it an expansion of public and semi-public golf courses that made the game accessible to middle-class men who wanted to play it, but not to join the private club, whose membership fees were a luxury and whose social exclusivity was, in certain cases, a more significant barrier than the money. Between 1950 and 1960, the number of golf courses in the United States will approximately double. Eisenhower plays golf and is photographed playing golf, and through the mechanism by which presidential habits become aspirational, makes golf the appropriate leisure activity of the middle-class American man. A round on a public course costs about $1.50. You walk the course. A golf cart is not yet standard equipment, and the walk is part of the thing. For hours in the fresh air covering a few miles of carefully maintained grass, thinking about a sequence of small physical problems in a context that has no other agenda. There are no urgent messages waiting at the 9th hole. The game proceeds at whatever pace the players in front of you set, and the players in front of you are also not being tracked by anything. The round takes as long as it takes, and when it is done, and you drive home with the particular body tiredness of someone who's walked several miles while also thinking about their grip. Perhaps instead you bowl. Bowling in the 1950s is enjoying something close to cultural dominance. AMF introduced the automatic pin setter in 1951, Eliminating the pin boy, a real job, held by real adolescent boys who reset pins by hand between frames, and transforming bowling into the smoothly mechanized, consistently available entertainment it will remain. Bowling leagues run through workplaces, churches, fraternal organizations, and community groups are one of the primary social structures of working and middle-class American life in this decade. You may be in one. Most men with some kind of organizational connection are in something similar. The bowling league provides what the golf course provides more individually. A fixed appointment, a group of people you see regularly enough to know in the specific companionable way of competitive games, a Tuesday or Thursday evening that has a shape and a purpose and produces, over a season, the particular communal satisfaction of shared endeavor. Or perhaps this particular Saturday, you simply stay home. The lawnmower comes out of the garage. The grass gets mowed in rows. The satisfying geometric lines of a machine moving across a managed surface. The edges get done with the long-handled manual edger. The leaves, it is October, and the young suburban trees are producing more leaves than you expected when you planted them. Get raked into piles, and the piles get dealt with. And the whole operation takes a few hours during which the main sounds of the mower's engine, the scrape of the rake, and the distant sound of neighbors doing more or less the same thing in both directions. Afterward, you work in the basement. The workshop has been taking shape slowly over the past 18 months. A workbench built from lumber bought at the hardware store. A good set of hand tools organized on a pegboard. A vise. Power tools that have arrived one at a time. Each one a significant purchase justified by the specific project it was bought for. Popular Mechanics has been running instructions for building exactly this kind of basement workshop, with plans and materials lists and the cheerful assumption that its readers will actually build the things described, not read about them nostalgically. The do-it-yourself ethic of the 1950s is not a weekend hobby culture in the way it will eventually become when the distinction between doing something yourself and having someone do it for you is primarily about identity rather than economics. In 1953, you fix your own faucet because that is what men who own houses do. You paint the exterior trim when it needs painting. You service the car in basic ways. Oil changes, spark plugs, the adjustments that don't require specialized equipment. You build the workbench because you need a workbench, and building it yourself is how workbenches come to be. The culture of the decade assumes competence as a baseline, not virtuosity, not professional-grade expertise. Just the ordinary working competence of someone who owns things and therefore maintains things, because that is a natural relationship between ownership and the object owned. By the time the afternoon is fully advanced, you have accomplished several things, or have rested from the accumulated work of the week, and either way the Saturday has a weight and a solidity to it that feels like time well spent, which it was, even if, perhaps especially if, much it was spent doing nothing remarkable at all. After dinner, the family moves to the living room. The television has already been on for the children during the late afternoon. The farm of afternoon children's programming that the networks have figured out runs reliably between 3 and 6, filling the living room with Roy Rogers and Howdy Doody, and the Lone Ranger, while the dinner preparation happens in the kitchen 2 rooms away. Now, in the evening, the television becomes family property, and the question of what to watch is settled by the simple fact that there is not much to choose from. 3 networks. 3 channels, available when the antenna cooperates and the atmospheric conditions don't produce the kind of ghosting that makes the image look like a program being broadcast from somewhere in the vicinity of purgatory. NBC, CBS, and ABC. The programming runs from late afternoon to approximately 11 at night, when the station signs off, literally signs off, with a brief announcement, the national anthem played over footage of something patriotic, a test pattern, and silence, signaling that television for today is finished, and you should probably consider doing the same. The television set sits in a wooden cabinet that is, architecturally, more distinguished than what it contains. The cabinet is walnut veneer or mahogany finish, with fabric over the speaker grill. The whole thing designed to look like furniture worthy of a living room rather than an appliance worthy of a garage. The screen is 12 to 17 inches measured diagonally, black and white, and its picture quality varies from quite good to what can only be described as impressionistic, depending on the evening's atmospheric conditions and the position of the rabbit ear antenna on top. You've spent time adjusting rabbit ears. More time than you had predicted when you bought the set. The optimal position of the antenna for a clear picture is a function of the direction of the broadcast tower, the materials in your walls, the position of other metal objects in the room, and the exact angle of your own body relative to the set while you are making the adjustment, which means that the position that produced a perfect picture while you were standing becomes imperfect the moment you sit down and take your hands off the antenna. This is known and accepted and occasionally maddening. But the programs themselves, when the picture holds, are genuinely good. Your Show of Shows runs on Saturday nights. 90 minutes of live comedy with Sid Caesar and Imogene Coca and Carl Reiner, and writers who include Mel Brooks and Neil Simon and Woody Allen. All of them in a room together try and fill 90 minutes of live television every week with comedy that is actually funny. The results are uneven in the way that live performance is always uneven, and brilliant in the way that live performance occasionally achieves when the right people are in the same room under the right pressure. I Love Lucy is perhaps the most watched program in the country in 1953. More Americans watch the episode in which Lucille Ball's fictional character gives birth to a fictional baby than watch the actual inauguration of Dwight Eisenhower the next morning. 44 million people watching the same thing at the same time on the same night. This is a television of the 1950s. Not a choice from an infinite menu, but a shared experience, a cultural campfire around which a nation gathers in its separate living rooms and watches together. There is something that will eventually be missed about this, and that will be missed without quite knowing what to call it. The evening moves at the pace evenings move at when they are not being organized or optimized. 10 o'clock arrives. The set goes off. The room returns to its own quiet. You close your book or put down the newspaper that arrived this morning and was read only partially before the day took over. The drink on the side table has been empty for an hour. The house, in these late minutes, makes its small sounds. The furnace cycling. A board somewhere settling. The refrigerator taking a breath. Tomorrow is Sunday. Sunday has its own architecture, and that architecture begins with the sound of church bells and the smell of a pot roast going into the oven, and the particular mood that Sundays have had since before anyone alive can remember. The Sunday feeling, which is a mixture of rest and mild anticipation, and the specific quality of time that knows it will shortly become Monday. But Sunday begins with church. Sunday morning, an hour later than every other morning. The quality of Sunday mornings in 1953 has no real equivalent in later decades, because what Sunday morning is cannot be fully separated from what Sunday means, and what Sunday means is still, in the mid-1950s, relatively clear. It is the day you go to church. In 1953, religious affiliation in America runs somewhere near 95%. Church attendance is at one of its historical peaks. Gallup will find, in a survey in 1958, that 49% of Americans attended services in a given week. For the middle-class suburban demographic we are tracing, these numbers run even higher. Church attendance is not just a religious expression in the 1950s. It is a social infrastructure, the mechanism by which community maintains itself across a week, the institution that gives shape to the rhythms of the year and the transitions of a life. You dress for it. There is a particular tie. There is a good coat. The children are dressed with the surgical precision of parents who have calculated that the difference between a child who looks appropriately dressed for church and one who doesn't is approximately 45 minutes of additional negotiation, and who have accordingly started the process very early. The church is not far. The walk, or the short drive, has a specific quality of Sunday mornings. Quieter than any other morning, the streets occupied by people moving in the same direction with the same general purposefulness. Other families, fathers in good coats, mothers in their Sunday dresses, children in shoes that pinch slightly, in clothes that are acceptable and therefore uncomfortable. The service is formal. The hymns are familiar. The pipe organ fills a vaulted space with sound that has a particular quality. Not just loud, but architecturally inseparable from the building it's in, as if the sound and the stone were made for each other, which they were. The minister knows your name and will ask after your mother on the way out. The sermon runs about 25 minutes, which is not brief, but is within the range of what a person can maintain genuine attention for without significant effort, especially if the minister is good at his work, which yours is. After the service, the congregation collects on the steps in the morning light. The churchyard conversation on a Sunday is not a secondary feature of the weekly service. It is half the point. This is where you learn that the Patterson boy made the high school baseball team, that the Hendersons have a new nephew in Cleveland, that someone on Oak Street is in the hospital, that the fellowship committee is looking for volunteers for the Christmas pageant. This is where the neighborhood manages its social knowledge, updates its internal map of who is doing what and needs what and has something to share. The minister shakes your hand. He asks after your family by name. You drive home. The pot roast has been in the oven since 8 o'clock. The kitchen, when you open the door after church, smells like the word home rendered in three-dimensional olfactory form. Braised beef and root vegetables and bread and coffee left in the pot, and the particular warm combination of a kitchen that has been doing its work all morning while the house was empty. You stand in the doorway for a moment before taking off your coat. Sunday dinner is the best meal of the week. It always is. It always has been. There's a reason the tradition of the Sunday roast, the best food, prepared with the most care, reserved for a day that requires a meal worthy of the time set aside from ordinary things, run so deep and so long in the cultures that practice it. It is a way of marking the week as something more than a sequence of obligations, a way of saying at the table, gathered together, that this particular intersection of people and food and time deserves to be noticed. The prayer is brief, then dinner, then the long Sunday afternoon, which belongs to no particular obligation, and which arranges itself around a nap, or a walk, or the newspaper, or a drive with no destination. The kind of purposeless Sunday driving that costs about 60 cents in gasoline, and produces something that is not quite rest, and not quite adventure, but something that partakes of both. By 6 in the evening, the week is already visible on the horizon. By 10, you are asleep. Let's talk about your health. You are somewhere in your early to mid-40s, and your body is the body of someone who has spent those years in the specific physical way of a mid-century American man, moderately active, not athletically ambitious, eating a diet that is high in fat and protein and refined starch, smoking a significant number of cigarettes per day, drinking in the socially calibrated way of your class and decade, and not visiting a doctor with any particular frequency unless something specific has called attention to itself. You feel fine. Medicine in 1953 is genuinely improving, and the improvement is happening fast enough that the people living through it can feel it as something distinct from ordinary historical progress. The penicillin that became available to civilian populations in the late 1940s represented a transformation in the treatment of bacterial infections that cannot be overstated by anyone who has tried to communicate the pre-antibiotic mortality statistics for things like pneumonia, streptococcal infections, or wound infections of the kind that soldiers and civilians sustain with heartbreaking regularity. Streptomycin, discovered in 1943, is making meaningful inroads against tuberculosis, which was still a serious cause of death in the 1930s, and which, by the mid-50s, is retreating with something like the inevitability of a tide going out. The Salk vaccine will be announced in April of 1955. To understand what that announcement will mean, you have to understand what polio has meant for the previous 20 years. Polio is not, by the standards of the major epidemic diseases of history, among the most lethal, but it has a psychological specificity that sets it apart. It strikes children. It strikes randomly in summer in places of recreation, public swimming pools, playgrounds, as if the disease has specifically targeted the ordinary pleasures of childhood. Its aftermath, for those who survive, ranges from manageable weakness to permanent paralysis to the iron lung, a steel cylinder the size of a small car in which a person whose respiratory muscles have been damaged lies for months or years while the machine's mechanical bellows breathe for them. Every summer is polio season. Every summer, parents keep children out of public pools. Crowds in warm weather produce a specific low-level anxiety that those who didn't live through this era find difficult to imagine. The early 1950s see 50,000 cases in America alone. When Jonas Salk's vaccine is announced as safe and effective in the spring of 1955, people cry in the streets of cities, not metaphorically. School days are declared. Church bells ring. The New York Stock Exchange pauses trading to mark the moment. The reaction is religious in its intensity because something genuinely religious has happened. A human-created thing has removed a terror from a human summer. You, in 1953, are 2 years away from this. But you live in a decade when medicine is perceptibly catching up to suffering, when the announcement of a vaccine or a treatment or a new drug represents a real change in what it means to be a human body in the world. Your family doctor works in a converted Victorian on a quiet street a few miles from your house. He makes house calls. When one of your children runs a high fever in the night, you can call him and he will come. This is not extraordinary in 1953. It is simply what doctors do. The transformation of medicine into an industry organized around institutions rather than practitioners, with appointment systems measured in weeks and billing departments larger than clinical staff, is still a generation away. Your doctor knows your name, your wife's name, your children's names, your mother's condition, and the fact that you smoke more than you should, about which he has said something once, and will say something again when the moment is right. Your employer provides health insurance. The coverage is not lavish. It does not need to be, because the costs of medical care in 1953 are a fraction of what they will eventually become, partly because the billing complexity that will ultimately consume a significant portion of every healthcare dollar has not yet been invented, and partly because the pharmaceutical industry has not yet developed the pricing strategies that will eventually make certain medications cost more than monthly rent. You are, taking everything together, reasonably well cared for. The cigarettes remain a problem that the decade has not yet identified as such. But the trend of things is right, and the direction is good. Something is hovering at the edges of all of this. The 1950s are not a decade without shadows. Any account of the period that presents it as uncomplicated is either dishonest or incomplete, and this one intends to be neither. The Soviet Union has nuclear weapons, not theoretical weapons, real ones. The Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb in August of 1949, ending the American nuclear monopoly that the post-war years had rested on, and by the summer of 1953, it has tested a thermonuclear device, a hydrogen bomb, orders of magnitude more destructive than the atomic weapons that ended the Second World War. The mathematics of what a nuclear exchange between two superpowers would produce is a calculation that nobody in power in either country has fully made, partly because the honest answer to that calculation is too dark to make operational decisions around. But the outline is clear to everyone who reads a newspaper. The possibility exists, for the first time in human history, of a conflict that ends not with a peace treaty and a long reconstruction, but with cities reduced to ash and the management of the aftermath becoming the consuming work of survivors in a landscape that does not easily allow survival. You think about this sometimes. Not constantly. Not in the foreground of daily consciousness. You think about it the way you think about the possibility of a serious car accident, genuinely aware of the possibility, capable of entertaining the thought for a moment, and then quite capably returning attention to morning coffee and the commute and the meeting at 2 o'clock. This is not denial. It is the ordinary human machinery for continuing to function in a world that has always contained, at some level, the possibility of catastrophe. The civil defense system of the decade tries to manage this background anxiety through a combination of practical preparation and structured optimism. The duck and cover drills in which your children crouch under their classroom desks at the sound of a specific tone are performed with the serious attentiveness that children bring to drills, and the faint surrealism of expecting a school desk to provide meaningful protection against the thing being drilled goes largely unremarked by the adults who design the drills, because the alternative, acknowledging that no civilian preparation is adequate, is not a state message that the 1950s is prepared to deliver. McCarthy is still in the air. Joseph McCarthy, Republican senator from Wisconsin, has been conducting his hearings for several years now, and the word bearing his name has become the term for a specific pattern of behavior. The accusation, leveled with great public force and insufficient evidence, that someone's loyalty to America is compromised by secret communist sympathies. The hearings will destroy careers. They will produce a cultural climate in which certain kinds of dissent feel genuinely dangerous. They will be ended, finally and decisively, by the Army McCarthy hearings in the spring of 1954, when McCarthy's techniques are made visible to a national television audience, and the revelation of what he actually is rather than what he claims to be produces a collapse so public and so complete that his name becomes permanently an adjective. But that is next year. This year, in the autumn of 1953, the hearings continue. You have opinions about this that you keep mostly to yourself at work, because the 1950s are produced, among their other features, a culture in which political opinions are shared carefully and in company that has been tested. This is not paranoia. Exactly. It is prudence, which is something slightly different, and which is, on reflection, probably the wiser response to a political moment that has not fully shown all of its edges. The Korean War armistice was signed in July of 1953, and the war, 3 years, 33,000 American dead, the largest war America has fought to a conclusion that is not quite a conclusion. It is over in a way that things are over when they stop, but don't resolve. The armistice holds the two Koreas at a line not very different from where they were before the fighting began. This ending, without a clear outcome, produces in the national psyche something harder to name than grief or relief, a kind of unfinished reckoning of what the war was for that will linger longer than the fighting itself. You turn off the evening news. The room returns to its quiet. The threat is real, and it is held at a distance, and the distance is maintained by the particular human genius for continuing to live one's life in the presence of large, incomprehensible dangers. The suburb helps. The house helps. The lawn and the car and the children asleep upstairs all help in the sense that the immediately present, the physically close, the tangibly real have a gravitational pull on human attention that abstract threats, even very large and genuine abstract threats, struggle to overcome. The locks are checked. The lights go off. The threat remains at its distance. And the night is quiet. It is late now. 11 o'clock. The street outside your bedroom window is dark, and the street light at the end of the block makes a small yellow circle on the pavement below it, interrupted occasionally by the shadow of a leaf falling through the beam. The temperature has gone down into the high 30s, and the furnace cycles on again with the low-frequency rumble of machinery, doing something useful. Your wife turned her lamp off 20 minutes ago. You are reading. The book might be one of the bestsellers of 1953, Herman Wouk's The Caine Mutiny, perhaps, which won the Pulitzer this year, and which is that rare novel that rewards its readers without condescending to them, or one of the popular histories that the decade produces in impressive quantity, histories that take a genuine scholarly subject and present in prose clear enough to read in bed. Or perhaps you are reading something your colleague at work pressed on you, which is how books travel in 1953 in the absence of recommendation algorithms, from one person's hands to another's, with a comment that is either accurate or hopelessly wrong, depending on whether the colleague knows you. Reading in bed at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday is a small luxury, not grand, not remarkable, but reliable, available, something you can do in the warmth of a room that the furnace has been heating since September, in the specific silence of a house that is sleeping around you while you remain, briefly, awake. You read another page, another 3 paragraphs. The book is good enough to want to continue, and you are tired enough not to. You put the book on a nightstand with a corner folded down, a gesture that will horrify a librarian, and that your wife finds mildly infuriating, and that you perform nonetheless reliably every time. And you turn off your lamp. The room is dark, not completely dark. The street light comes in faintly at the edges of the curtains. The small red glow of something electrical somewhere on the dresser. The familiar shapes of a room you have slept in long enough that your body knows them, without requiring eyes. The pillow receives you, and in that space between wakefulness and sleep, in the particular openness of a mind that has let go of the day's agenda, thoughts move freely and in their own directions. You think, without quite meaning to, about the house, about the specific fact of having it. You grew up in a house that was adequate but small during a decade that made adequate feel precarious. The Depression was not an event in your childhood. It was a climate, a weather system that lasted for years. You learned, in those years, what it means to not know if the floor will hold. Your parents had that knowledge in their bodies in a way that expressed itself in how they spoke about money, how they saved, how they reacted to unexpected expenses, how they measured the distance between what they had and what they might lose. The war came next. The war was its own education in impermanence, the impermanence of places, of arrangements, of people. If you served, you carry this in a specific way that people who have been in certain places carry what those places did to them. Not always in the foreground, not always accessible to language, but present. And then this, the house, the job, the car in the garage, the children asleep down the hall, making the small sounds of children in deep sleep, the wife breathing beside you, The neighborhood outside in the October dark. It is, compared with the preceding decades, an extraordinary thing. You are not certain that you appreciate it adequately in the ordinary hours of the day. You are not certain that anyone fully appreciates the ordinary hours while they're inside them, because the ordinary hours are also the busy hours. The hours of commute and the meeting and the dinner and the children's bedtime negotiations. But in this quiet, at this hour, the fullness of the thing presents itself without asking permission. The house that is yours. The children whose health is your central private preoccupation, in the way that the health of children is always the central private preoccupation of their parents, whatever the public face presents. The wife who manages so much of the machinery of this life that the machinery often seems invisible, because invisible is what effective machinery looks like. The job that will be there tomorrow. The alarm clock on the nightstand that will ring at 6:30. The coffee that will begin percolating by 6:45. The newspaper that will be on the step. All of it waiting. All of it reliable. All of it, in the most fundamental sense of the word, yours. As we come to the end of this night, let's say one more clear and honest thing. The paradise we've been living inside tonight was not available to everyone. The prosperity of the 1950s, which was real and significant and genuinely transformative for the people it reached, did not reach everyone equally. The GI Bill that purchased the house was administered in ways that systematically directed its benefits away from black veterans, directed them toward white veterans and away from integrated neighborhoods, and toward the newly constructed white suburbs that the Federal Housing Administration was simultaneously underwriting. The neighborhoods were not accidentally homogeneous. They were the product of policies that were, in a word, exclusionary. The roles that made the domestic machinery run so smoothly were not freely chosen by all the women performing them. They were the product of legal and economic structures that restricted women's alternatives in ways that the next decade would begin, loudly and permanently, to contest. The paradise was built with walls. This is the honest account. And the honest account also includes this. For the specific man we have been following tonight, the 1950s offered something genuinely extraordinary. A generation that had survived a depression and a world war, two of the most destabilizing forces in modern history, found itself, in the space of a decade, in possession of material security and a social stability that their parents could not have predicted or even fully imagined. They built suburbs that were uniform and were also homes. They drove cars that were large and were also freedom. They watched television that was sometimes trivial and was sometimes, briefly, luminous. They mowed their lawns on Saturday mornings and stood in driveways in the evening and put their children to bed and sat in the quiet of their houses afterward. And the country around them was imperfect and narrow in certain ways and genuinely expansive in others. And they lived inside it with the quiet confidence of people who had been promised a deal and had found the deal to be real. It did not last forever. Nothing does. The 50s will give way to the 60s, which will arrive with all the force of something that has been compressed for too long. The civil rights movement, already moving in the courts and in the streets of Montgomery, will break through into the national consciousness with a clarity that cannot be looked away from. The women's movement will look at the domestic arrangement we've described tonight and ask, with growing force and eventually with legal consequence, whether the arrangement was as freely chosen as it appeared. The economy will change. The streets will change. The television will change. The hat will be worn, eventually, only ironically, and then not at all. The alarm clock on the nightstand in the house in the suburb will keep ringing at 6:30 for a few more years. And then the decade will be over, and something else will begin, as something else always does. But tonight, on this Tuesday in October 1953, in a bedroom in a suburb in a country, experiencing something close to the most ordinary, comfortable, quietly fortunate version of domestic life that the long and complicated human story has yet produced for a man like this, in a house like this, in a decade like this, tonight the floor is solid, and the blankets are warm, and the children are safe, and the morning is several hours away. The furnace ticks. The refrigerator hums in the kitchen downstairs. The newspaper boy, somewhere across town, is loading his bicycle for the morning round. The percolator is cold but will not be cold for long. And somewhere in the quiet dark of the October suburbs in Ohio or New Jersey or California or any of 100 other places where the post-war dream pressed itself into concrete and stucco and hope. A man is sleeping the sleep of someone who has, for this particular moment in history, found a version of daily life that is measured against the full scope of human possibility and human disappointment. Genuinely close to enough. It is not perfect. It was never perfect. But tonight, it is here. The street outside is dark and still and perfectly, completely quiet. Rest well. Good night.